You're listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Munson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.
Welcome to Pluto Through the Houses. So if you're a new listener, welcome to this podcast. If you've listened to me before, welcome back. This is a series to explore how you can use the knowledge of your natal Pluto or transiting Pluto to get the best advantage in life. In this short podcast, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts and experience about whether Pluto is in your first house in your natal chart or whether it's going through your first house right now, so that you can understand the challenges of this position and also to understand how to use it to its best. Like, for instance, is your Pluto well placed? Does it have really good connections to other planets? Or is your Pluto quite difficultly placed in your birth chart with lots of squares and oppositions? That's all going to make a difference. And so, this is a bit of a deep dive into Pluto. Before we get going, though, let's have a think about the key words of Pluto. So Pluto is a planet that transforms our experience. In mythological terms, it's the god of wealth and power and the underworld. And if you would like to understand a little bit more about Pluto, then please do watch my Pluto and Aquarius podcast for quite a lengthy description. Pluto shows us where we seek power because it shows us where we feel weak and where we feel very vulnerable. And it really pinpoints how our ego seeks to safeguard or safety-proof our life so that we don't fall victim to what we fear is going to happen. And Pluto can also show us where we experience trauma and manipulation, sexual prowess and imbalance, and also enemies. It really shows how these things show up for us. From a spiritual point of view, I think Pluto shows up to show us where we have yet to yield to an outside or unseen power and let it do its worst. For instance, personal experience has proven to me over and over, and also the experience of my clients, that when we fight against what Pluto represents, we nearly always come off worse. It really represents where we have a false awareness of where our power seeks to be great, and coming face to face with the planet transiting our Pluto, or more importantly, when Pluto's moving over a significant part of our charts, it really does show us where we have something deep and sadly painful to learn. But here's the thing, it always teaches us where we are truly free. So I always think we come out, of this much better off. One of the things I've really observed of people with a first house Pluto is they often have quite dramatic lives. I want to just put a bit of context around that, because obviously the first house is one of the most important houses. It's about your body and it's about your arrival. It's about your being born. It's like your birthing in your chart. And the ascendant being, I think, the most important point, really, because when anything goes over that point, it really brings up such a range of emotions and situations. And also, if you have a planet that is right on your ascendant, as opposed to being, fully in your first house, if you've got Pluto on your ascendant, that brings a lot of the drama of Pluto into your life. So, a lot of people that I do see that come to me with quite chronic situations have got one of the outer planets, mainly Pluto, right on their first house. It's on their ascendant, because as it goes over the ascendant, you feel it coming. I mean, Pluto really takes a couple of years to clear a point. So you'll feel it arriving. A couple of years before, you'll start to get that whisper that there's this change coming. And then boom, you're in the process of the Pluto change. And then it will still take a couple of years to kind of filter out. But around the time when Pluto crosses your ascendant, it usually is not necessarily a big event that changes things, but it's a culmination of where you're going in life and what you're not letting go of, and what you need to release, really, to be able to move forwards. It always shows us where we're going to get our asses kicked and where we need to really pay attention to, I think, a bit of arrogance. Like we become so strong in our plutonic selves and think, we're masters of our own universe and blah, blah, blah. And it often, we often fall from that position of pride. It's a fall from grace. So it can be quite difficult as Pluto goes over the ascendant. It usually does take a bit of working around. I mean, I was living at home, I was barely a teenager. So there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I was running away from home or anything. But for me, I experienced it as a growing sense of identity shift, like, who am I? Which it fitted in perfectly for puberty. And dare I say, I dodged a bullet there because, if Pluto comes up over your ascendant in your mid-20s, that could be quite a defining factor. And you might not have so many support systems in place. If you're going through it in your 30s, you may well find that you've already lived your life in a certain way, and then all of a sudden there's this feeling that no, it's not right for you anymore, and you want to change it, and of course the longer you live before it crosses over your ascendant, and for some people it will never cross over their ascendant because it takes such a long time to go through all 12 houses and 12 signs. So not everyone is going to have it crossing the ascendant, but it can bring up a lot of darkness for you, and a lot of questions about what your purpose is and where your power is in life. Now, if you're born with Pluto right on your ascendant, again, I see a lot of people with a strong Pluto on an angle, but in particular the ascendant, they have this very, very strong need to have purpose in their life and to be powerful in some way. Now, again, we have to ask ourselves, is power a bad thing? I talk about it a lot in this podcast. I guess it's how we do it. Are we being powerful to have control over people? Or are we being powerful to bring joy or to spread love or to spread healing? When we're being powerful, are we giving the opportunity to other people to be powerful? Is our power creating more power and empowerment for people, or is our power taking away power from others? I think that's always something I would say early on, for anyone that's got a outer planet, or in fact any planet on the angle, is that we tend to play out the worst parts of it first. As small children, we'll probably have very willful, very determined small children that are very powerful and want to exude that power, but that's not necessarily going to be like that forever. They will come to a stage where they realize the power needs to be shared. So that is just, a caveat. Now let's go on to the actual first house part of this podcast, because, I don't want to harp on just about the ascendant, but the ascendant is such a huge part of, this experience in our chart. So anyway, let's bring it on. So in the first house, Pluto brings up the following themes and keywords to do with power, and that would be our identity, our body, our need to be seen. And so it's a very, very strong position in the first house. So if we remember and we keep in mind that Pluto is about our wealth, our power, our sexual charisma, but also what we fear, I think, that's going to give us a good start. So in the first house, it's all about identity, our body, like our physical body. So where are we seeking power then? When Pluto's in our first house, the first thing I see really is that these people, like people with a first house Pluto, are really wanting to be in charge. They have a really strong need to be in charge of their own life, of their own destiny, and definitely of their own body. They're not the kind of, like as a baby or a small child, they're not the kind of child that you can get to eat something that they don't want to eat or wear something that you don't want to wear. And if you are able to crush them to be able to do that, there will probably be some kind of consequences. I know some very compliant children that have grown into being very defiant adults. The moment they were free to be themselves, that's it. They were in charge and definitely not going to relinquish that power. So there is this, I think, the ability that Pluto in first person has, in as much as they really seek a strong body. They don't want to be overpowered. Overpowering is a really, really strong word here, because what they really fear is being insignificant or being weak in their body, being consumed by something outside of themselves. So I imagine that people with a really strong Pluto in their first house were probably terrified at the time that the pandemic phenomenon was announced, and that, that all the information started spreading across the globe. I'm recording this in 2023, by the way. Much of the other series, where I've looked at other outer planets, they were recorded back in, I think, 2018. So there's a bit of a time lapse between these, and a lot of different experiences have cropped up for humanity. So yes, I would absolutely think that people with Pluto in the first were some of the most visually and physically rocked by the idea of a plague going around the world, and would have taken very, very strong action to protect themselves, including all sorts of barriers and boundaries, probably masking. There's a very sort of deep need to be in control of their body and not to be overpowered. So, for instance, people with a first house Pluto that I know very closely, they absolutely won't accept anything into their life that's not for them. And they might just change their mind at the last minute if they don't want to do something. And that's completely okay. And now, obviously, we all have the freedom to do that. And yet people with Pluto in the first, I think, take that chance to direct and control what is in their immediate environment, and does it suit them or not. If it doesn't feel right, they're out of there. So they're also very intuitive in terms of their body. What they really need to learn, I think, is possibly to let go of being in charge. That other people can also be strong and capable and protective. So, for instance, one of the themes that I've noticed coming up is that people with Pluto in the first don't necessarily trust other people's power, don't obviously trust other people's capabilities in the same way as they have in the trust and faith in their own bodies. That is obviously whilst their bodies are all working perfectly for them, and that they've proven over and over again that they are really in charge. So, for instance, you might have somebody that always insists on driving, or who takes care of things because that's the way they do it. By taking care of the things in their immediate vicinity, they retain their control. And so, one of the things I think people with a Pluto first house are needing to learn, or could choose to learn if they want to. Can you see with my language? I'm not forcing it down your throats here. It's really that you can trust other people. Because if you don't trust other people, then there's a lack of intimacy. You're not letting other good experiences come in. If you're not trusting other people. And there might be some very, very strong reasons as to why you dislike other people having any dominion over you. So, for instance, Pluto also shows up in a place in our chart where we have had problems, So it often shows us where we've been dominated. So, for instance, you might have a very dominating parent, or a couple of dominating parents. You may well have had a very serious illness or an accident. So anything that affects the boundary and your dominion is fought very heavily. In particular, if you've got people manipulating you, or it's not a very comfortable time, I don't think, if you've got a Pluto in the first house and you're at school, because there is this assumption that you're there ready to learn and to be imprinted upon. And again, there is that very distinct feeling of being controlled in your mind this time. So it's not about your immediate vicinity necessarily, although you're meant to sit in the same seat and not budge, not move. So yeah, anywhere where you feel like you're being manipulated, controlled, changed, and it's not of your volition, then you'll protect that. Now, something else that comes up with Pluto first house is they tend to have a very sort of powerful identity, an image, and it can be quite sexy. It can be quite, for instance, they become personalities in their own right, so people know them because of their public image or who they are. There's something powerful about them, and people tend to trust them, which is great. If your Pluto is well connected to other planets, then the chances are you've got the strength to overcome any great illness or threats. You've probably got really great charisma that can be enjoyed and encouraged. and you're probably well received. So for instance, if your Pluto is in a lovely set of trines or something like that to other planets, that when you're being yourself, which is strong and powerful, people are receiving it well. They're not fighting against it. With squares and oppositions, you may well find that you feel rejected, and so you push yourself more on people, and you're repelling them more. So with the squares and oppositions, it's very difficult for you to actually be yourself and be powerful in yourself, because there is that feeling that other people are feeling the strength of your power, and also the fact that you're trying to get them to be impressed by you. There's this, it almost feels like people become aware of a manipulation, and so it's almost like a repellent. So there's some real challenges there, and if you think it'd be useful to unpack the whole, first house Pluto more in a small online study group, then please do get in touch. It's louisatannermunson@gmail.com, because, I am running a series of online events where we can talk about the position of our Plutos, and to unpack it, in small groups where we can share our experiences and stuff. So that's something that might be helpful, especially, if you're struggling with it. Now, in terms of transiting Pluto, so let's say that Pluto is currently moving through your first house. What's needed to be seen and understood is that your need to survive and thrive is more important now than ever, and it just feels very, very imbalanced. There's this feeling that someone is maybe taking away your freedoms, and you need to find freedom to be yourself. So there is a bit like, how I said at the start, that people are very protective of their environment, their boundaries, their body. When Pluto is going through the first house, it becomes a lot more urgent, a lot more imminent. It feels like you have to absolutely protect yourself. It can make people a bit more accident prone, but please don't take it too seriously, because I don't want you to worry about it, because transiting Pluto can take 20 years in some cases, or even 25 years, or even 30. Pluto's got an elliptical which means uneven orbit. So, Pluto could actually be going through your house for a really, really long time. So it would be very unhelpful for me to say, there's going to be accidents, because that's not necessarily true. I am a very accident-prone person, and when Pluto was going through my first house, I actually was hit by a lorry. And at another time I was also struck by lightning. So, there were some very strong Pluto. Oh, and also I also came off my bike and was on crutches. So I had a few different things happen to me when Pluto was actually going through my first house in my body at a time when I was determined to be myself. And that might be one of the reasons why these things happen. So for instance, my need at that time to survive and thrive was in being assertive, being independent, showing to the world that I was in control of my life, and I was all of, at the times when I had these incidents, I was between the age of 18 and 21, living in France on my own. So it's a different country. I'm from the UK, hitchhiking, all sorts of different things, really proving to the world that I didn't need anyone to survive. And that level of independence is really not that helpful all the time. You can't always be fully aware of what's going on. So, I would absolutely recommend that if Pluto is going through your first house right now, think about where your need to survive and thrive is so important to you that it's off balance, that it's off kilter, that, if you feel like someone is trying to take your freedoms away from you, you might want to ask yourself, where is that pain that's come up before? Where is it existing so much so that it's affecting your current moment? Because actually, a lot of people just want to help. There are lots of people that just really want to help and share. And again, it's I said this at the start of this short podcast, that Pluto in the first can really push away intimate situations, because it's very situational. They'll be intimate when they feel they can trust you, but the moment they start to feel, or the moment you start to feel that all of a sudden you're in danger, that's it. You push that potential intimacy away, and it can be very, very destructive. So, I mean, Pluto is also one of these elements of destruction. It really shows you what is being destructed in your life and how things are falling apart. So, you know, when it's transiting your first house, absolutely be aware that you're not destructing yourself. You know, another thing that could happen when Pluto's going through your first house, and again, please don't take this as fact, though it is my own experience. I also got an autoimmune disorder, which I've actually corrected. It's not necessarily something that you have for life, although, you know, many doctors will say that. But when I was 16 and Pluto was going through my first house at that point, I was pretty poorly, and it felt disastrous to me, you know, to be, well, it was great that I was off school, but it was, I had no energy, I had no power, I had no strength to look after myself. I lost all faith in my body, you know, the unique trust that you might have had in your body and what you were capable of. It felt like I couldn't trust my body. It felt like my body became the enemy. So again, there's this real feeling of who's got the power, and if you don't have the power, are you seeing the people that do have the power, or the entities, or the body, or whatever it is, as having the power? Do you see them as an enemy? Because it's almost like when you're seeing everything as your enemy and you're fighting against it, it gets worse and worse and worse, and it's just generating more of that conflict for yourself. So, you know, you're almost destructing yourself. You might even find, you know, like Pluto going through the first house could coincide with the time when, you know, you're literally destroying yourself with your habits, you know, or being very, very risky with the way you drive, you know. So it's a real time when we have to really ask ourselves, am I actually being attacked, or am I actually destroying myself? It's really important. So yeah, you may feel very overpowered in your body, and feel like you're losing the power in your body. And so, you know, again, if you think it's useful to unpack this in a small study group, then just give me a shout. It's louisatannermunson@gmail.com. But it's a time, like, if any of this is happening, or you can feel it coming, that you're starting to get extra suspicious, then it's important to work through this as quickly as possible and as thoroughly as possible, because, you know, Pluto really can separate us. If you think about modern day power and how power exists by being separate. Power is usually at the top, and then anyone that doesn't have the power is at the bottom. Like, if you think about the strong and powerful entities that might be involved in running this planet right now, and big policies that come up, you know, maybe worldwide policies and this, that, and the other, where people are controlling the lives of other people. They have to dehumanize the people in their language, to be able to do that. Again, there's this separation. So always look, if you're separating yourself from other people through dehumanizing them, seeing them differently, or seeing yourself differently, or feeling dehumanized, there's something very strong and plutonic going on in your chart. And it's time to come together. Well, I think what is usually happening here, and this is the big learning I see for people with Pluto in the first house, or transiting through the first house, is to realize that other people are also here on this planet with you, experiencing life with you. And whilst it is imperative that you feel safe, absolutely, we are actually, I think, social beings who actually really need connection. And I think it's time to recognise that if you really want to be free and independent yourself and have the power to make your own decisions, you've also got to allow other people to have their decisions and be totally free in themselves. So, you know, it's not okay to demand you have your needs met whilst also putting your demands on other people. So it's very... to me, it's a really clear situation. You can only be completely free when you're really taking responsibility for your own behaviors and also allowing other people to have their own experiences too, which again really goes against Pluto. It really freaks Pluto out. If you're like, yeah, actually, I'm not bothered about the power. We all need to be empowered and to share it. So anyway, the other last thing I would share is just if you've got Pluto coming through the first house right now, or you've got your natal Pluto position in the first house, I would say that one of your big learnings is to find the sheer joy in being 100% yourself all the time, irrespective of what other people say. And it's a huge balancing act, and it's also very important. This is a very, very strong position for Pluto to be in. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. And if I can be of any help in the future, just drop me a line. Lots of love.
You've been listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Tannermunson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.